Steve Skrovan started out in the early 80s as a stand-up and actor before stepping into the writer's room of some of television's most beloved shows. Seinfeld, Hot in Cleveland, Till Death, School of Rock, and of course, Everybody Loves Raymond, where he spent all 9 seasons shaping one of the most successful sitcoms in television history, earning multiple Emmy nominations and wins along the way. He even adapted the series for audiences in Russia, Israel, and India. But his career didn't stop at sitcoms. He co-directed the Sundance documentary An Unreasonable Man about presidential candidate Ralph Nader, which went on to be shortlisted for an Academy Award. He also co-produced the TBS special Earth to America. Steve writes Bits and Pieces, a Substack blog of sharp, funny essays, and co-hosts the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Now, let's get into the zone with Steve Skrovan. Steve, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me. I'm so excited to talk to you. You're someone, like I was saying, I feel like I could talk to you forever. And I just want to start by quickly introducing how we know each other. So we met first on a show called Raising Expectations in the Writing Room. This was a Family Channel show. It was my first time in a writing room. And I was so nervous. I was freaking out. I mean, there's full of prolific writers in that room, yourself included. And I just remember you made me so comfortable. You encouraged me to pitch in the room. You laughed at my jokes, whether they were funny or not. And you even took me out to dinner and we had a one-on-one kind of hang and asked me how it was going and my ideas and stuff. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. You really set the bar high for all the writing rooms.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad. That's much better than go, my first job, and boy, was he an asshole.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking deep down, but I didn't want to say it.
That's right. Yes, well, I'm glad. Yes, I appreciate that.
Cool. Well, I want to start sort of at the beginning. I know you grew up in Ohio. You went to Yale. Yeah. You studied English.
Yeah.
You kind of started out as an actor, comedian. How did that transition happen from stand-up to writing? And was there a moment that you realized, like, oh, this could actually be a career for me as opposed to, a regular real person job?
Yeah. Well, that was my ambition from the beginning, was not to have a real job. And I graduated from college, and all of my friends, they're going to business school or medical school or law school. Mm-hmm. And all I knew is what I didn't want to do. And I had some pretensions to being a writer. I thought I would, I was a big fan of, Woody Allen's work. Mm-hmm. And I thought maybe I'll write for the New Yorker like Woody Allen. But at age 22, I quickly realized I didn't have a whole lot to write about, and so I went home after graduation and hung out in the proverbial parents' basement for 9 months.
Yeah,
and a comedy club. I noticed the ad newspaper for comedy club open up in Cleveland, and this is post-apocalyptic Cleveland of early 1980, late 1979. Mm-hmm. And, when all those Rust Belt cities, including New York City, were going bankrupt and there was just nothing happening. And there was this old Greek restaurant that these 4 young guys who were kind of my age in the early 20s partnered and bought and opened up as a comedy club. And it was kind of this beacon of life in this otherwise dead downtown. And I started going down there, and that's when I started going down there as a customer, and then realized that all these guys, and they were all guys at the time, were about my age, a little bit older. I was watching Bob Saget, who's only a year older than me, or Dave Coulier, or Mike Binder, who was actually younger than me, as was Dave Coulier. Guys like Jimmy Allen, all these guys who were coming in from LA to be headliners, at Gary Shandling at the Cleveland Comedy Club. And I thought, I'm gonna go up and try on their open mic, their amateur night. And I did. And it was a revelation, because after I did it a couple of times, the club owner, a guy named Dino Vince, who was pretty much my age, said, look, I'm looking for local MCs. I'll pay you $35 a week to MC. And I said, yeah, sure.
Sounds like a good gig.
Yeah. This is like from Wednesday through Sunday, $35.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. And I learned, and I started developing an act, and more than that, developing a bit of stage presence, and realized, oh, maybe this is the writing that, I'm writing, but I'm also performing. And it kind of combined those two things. And, I still didn't have a whole lot to write about, but somehow I was able to fool people and was funny and clever enough to fake my way through it. And then 6 months later, moved to New York City to pursue the same thing. And that's when I got into the New York City stand-up scene and spent most of the 1980s doing that. And it's where I met Larry David, among many others. But it was really Larry who launched my writing career. As I did stand-up, and then I got a couple of gigs hosting television shows. And one was a show on MTV called Mouth to Mouth, which was a live call-in talk show. It was when MTV was still doing videos, and they had one other show called Remote Control with my friend Ken Ober hosting. And this was the second foray into original programming for them. And that gig only lasted about 6 weeks, but it was a tremendous opportunity and a whole lot of fun. And I got to work with some good friends. The first two people I hired were Michael Patrick King, who went on to do all the Sex and the City stuff.
Sure.
And Two Broke Girls, and Scott Carter, who became the producer for Bill Maher's Politically Incorrect and Real Time until he retired a few years ago from that. And then my friend Mike Rowe, who has won Emmys for Futurama for animated shows, and my friend John Heyman, who we worked together in a couple of shows, including Seinfeld, which was my first TV writing gig. And after I hosted some television shows, there was a show that brought me out here it was a hidden camera show called Totally Hidden Video. And that's what brought me out to LA. Then I started writing spec scripts. I just started thinking, maybe I should, I was born at a fortunate time, which was at the peak of the baby boom. And the whole comedy boom of the 1980s, I think, was a baby boom phenomenon. Mm-hmm. Second half of the baby boom. And there was a big audience out there for people my age looking for entertainment. And there were a few of us who stepped forward and said, yeah, well, we all the same frame of reference. We'll do that.
Right.
And then as that waned at the dawn of the 90s, which was a natural sort of demographic occurrence, because then people started getting married, having families, and they're not going out. That big bulge in the population that was my audience, my generation's audience, starts staying in, as was I, because stand-up is a real young person's game. You out late at night in clubs or on the road. Mm-hmm. It's hard to have a family, that kind of thing. And I was already having a family by then. And I think what happened is that all of those comedians who developed in the 1980s, a few of them became stars of their own sitcoms, whether it was Roseanne or Tim Allen or Ray Romano in my case, or Jerry Seinfeld.
Right.
And then the rest of us wrote for them. So we can all be at the top of that pyramid being the stars of the shows. The rest of us then segued into writing for them, and that's
the real unsung heroes of television is the writers anyway.
Well, yeah, a lot of time, yeah. Because the first question everybody asks, actors is, how much do you improvise? And usually the answer should be zero, nothing.
Right. Now, I want to step back a little bit and talk. So you mentioned you met Larry David, and he was sort of helpful in. Did he put you on Seinfeld right away, just based on knowing your stand-up?
Yeah, Seinfeld had been on for a few years, and I'd known Larry, because we hung out at the Improv together, and played softball on the Improv softball team together, and played sports trivia. So we were socially entwined a bit too. And he had done a sketch show in the late 80s that were, the material was all of these sketches that had been cut at dress rehearsal for Saturday Night Live when he worked there in 1984. And he was very frustrated on that show because he got all these sketches that were cut. And he decided to mount them in a cabaret kind of setting, which we did at a place called Caroline's, which at that point was on 8th Avenue. It was the first iteration of Caroline's, which then went to the South Street Seaport and then later on to Times Square. But and he asked me to be part of the ensemble of actors in it. And I mentioned my friend John Heyman, he was in it. My friend Bill Sheft, my friend Kathy Levitan. We were all in this little ensemble for Larry's sketches, which he called The Bosun's Mate, which was the name of one of the sketches that had been cut. And we had a little run at Caroline's and got some great reviews for this show. And it was a really funny show. A lot of those sketches became the seeds for future Seinfeld episodes. So this is pre-Seinfeld.
Right.
So Larry knew me from that. And about 3 years into Seinfeld, he called me and again, my friend John Heyman and another comedian, Bob Shaw, another comedian, Bill Masters. And he said, do you want a job? And at this point, Seinfeld was still kind of a cult hit. It was on Wednesday nights. Tim Allen's Home Improvement was still kicking its ass in the ratings, but it had become sort of a cult favorite, and we all watched it. So I came on with those other three guys to be this think tank. He didn't want us to write scripts. He just wanted us to come up with premises because he was going to write the scripts because nobody could do it like him. And I had written, and the reason he got me the job, I should say, is I had written a Seinfeld spec, which everybody was writing at that time. My friend David Fury had invited me into this writers group because I had done sketches with him that we had mounted in a theater in Los Angeles. And he said, that one sketch you have, it might be a good thread for a Seinfeld episode. You should maybe write a Seinfeld spec. And so I did, and I did it under the auspices of this writers group that would just meet at his apartment, and none of us knew what we were doing.
Of course.
But it was an excuse on a Tuesday night to have something, if you wanted to participate, that we would all read and comment on, and kind of gave you this artificial deadline to do things. So that's where I was able to write that spec. I was able to get it to Larry, who wasn't going to do it, but he liked it well enough to think, okay, he's got some chops for this. So I'll hire him on this think tank, for this think tank theory.
Yeah, that's such an interesting sort of way to do it, because at least in my experience, most writing rooms are not that think tank structure. I mean, I don't know about you, but it doesn't seem to be the common thread that I've experienced. And so the fact that he sort of had the foresight to think outside the box a little bit about how a writing room could work and how it would work best for Seinfeld and for him is really interesting. I remember when we were in the Raising Expectations room, you told me a story about a pitch. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you know the story?
Yeah, I think so.
I'd love to hear it again if you could.
Okay. My friend Bill Masters and I, we were watching television at the time. This is 1992, 93. And this is, I say that only because it was before O.J. Simpson. And there was a slow speed car chase on television that we were watching. And Bill had told a story about something had happened to him where he was in an ATM, in line at an ATM in New York, and somebody was screaming because her purse had been stolen. And he saw this guy get into a car and start driving away. And Bill stood in front of the car, and the car was pulling out slowly and wasn't stopping for him. And Bill eventually just found himself on the hood of the car for about a block or two before the guy stopped and he jumped off. We thought it wouldn't be funny if this was something that Kramer did, except instead of stopping after a few blocks, it goes through the Lincoln Tunnel and it's on the New Jersey Turnpike, and it's a slow speed car chase with him on the hood of the car. And that was one thread, and we came up with a couple of other threads, and we were going to pitch this story to Larry because the think tank theory didn't really work, at least for us. It was hard to come up with a kind of a premise for an idea without following it through and seeing if it went anywhere. And so this is by the end of this, year that I was on the show, that was what we were doing, is kind of following through all these premises. So we got ready to pitch it to Larry, but Larry was out sick that day, which was unusual because he was like the Iron Man. He was like and he never missed. But he said, come to my house and you can pitch it there. So he was renting a house in Studio City, a few blocks away from where we were shooting the show. Bill and I got in a car and drove to his house, which was this very spare rental. And he's on the couch, this pathetic figure. He's got a little blanket over on the couch. And Bill and I come in, and he said, if I get up and have to go to the bathroom during the pitch, don't take it personally. And so we start pitching, and we got it all down because we had rehearsed and we practiced trading back and forth. And boom, and sure enough, about halfway through, Larry says, excuse me, and excuses himself, goes into the bathroom. And Bill and I turn to each other and go, I think it's going pretty well. I think he's liking it. And no sooner do we say that, from the other room, from the bathroom, we hear, and he's just vomiting his guts out. It was like we thought he was being swallowed by an alien. And then there's silence, toilet flush, water run. He comes out and he goes, I don't know about this pitch, but I think this is a pretty funny thing. And so he rejected our entire pitch, but that scene made its way into an episode that year where Jerry and George, because the year I was there was the show within a show episode, that arc of how they got the show. And that's where the whole sort of meme of a show about nothing started. And Bob Balaban was playing the NBC executive, and they set him up as having a bad piece of shellfish, and basically recreated that scene. So we did not get any, we inspired that famous scene, but did not write it, and would get no credit for it.
Well, the inspiration counts for something. I wonder, do you think that at least for me, I think such an important skill as a writer or as a creative in general is being able to handle rejection, and particularly in writing rooms when you're pitching things, or if you say a joke and it doesn't land, you have to be able to go, well, I'm not going to stop. Like, I'm going to do another joke now, right? How important was that skill for you, and how did you hone that ability?
It's 99% rejection. That's what you have to get used to. And I think the way I learned how to handle that had nothing to do with writing. It had to do with sports. I grew up as a jock. I played football, baseball, basketball. I played football in college. And you lose a lot, or you fail on your assignment, or you strike out. And what you learn as a jock is to kind of like put that behind you, because if you start thinking about that failure again, the next up you're gonna make another error, or you're gonna strike out again. You've got to get that out of your head. And I think that kind of helped me. In fact, after that rejection of that pitch that Bill and I did, the very next day I came in and pitched another idea. Didn't bother following it all through, and that pitch got accepted. It was the only pitch that ever got accepted that year I was on Seinfeld.
Wow.
And I remember Larry, while we were shooting that show, going, you came right back after that, and I think he really respected that.
Yeah.
I think it probably was one of the reasons he accepted the premise, accepted the pitch, because I didn't pout, I didn't get down. It's just and I think that's, for me, that's from sports. And when you're talking about, pitching a joke and it doesn't work, do you come back with another one? I was working in Moscow, in Russia, 12 years ago now, I guess. And they were doing the Russian version of Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this.
And I noticed, and I was there, they had already done all 200 of our original episodes. They had already adapted them, and they wanted to do original episodes. And my friend Jeremy Stevens had been there for the better part of 4 years, helping them do all of that through the whole process, not only the writing, but the shooting and the acting. And then I was called in, and this is 8 years after Raymond is off the air.
Mm-hmm.
And I was called in to help them break news stories because they wanted to keep going. And it was kind of interesting for me because when we stopped on Raymond after 9 years, we thought, the well is empty. We don't want to repeat ourselves. We were the ones who brought it to a close. We were not canceled. It would have gone on for longer if we had chosen to do that. If Phil and Ray hadn't decided, you know what, let's quit while we're ahead. So he was helping me pitch these stories. And it was all these kind of, what we would call baby writers. They're, new writers. They'd had, experience adapting episodes, not really writing original ones. And I noticed that as I was working with them, I was doing most of the work. Mm-hmm. I would say, okay, somebody tell me about some conflict you're having in a relationship, or whether with a parent or a wife or a sibling, whatever. And somebody would come up with something. And I go, okay, let's start with that. So let's say, and I would maybe describe a scene that would set that up. And then I'd say, okay, what happens next? And they'd all kind of be looking at each other. And I'd wait a while and I go, okay, well, what about if this happened?
Yeah.
Because this flows from this flow. And that kept happening. I kept, pausing and waiting. And I'm realizing not only in the story realm, but also in the joke pitching realm, mm-hmm. that they were very shy. And I realized, oh, you know what? I've got to show them to how to deal with something being rejected, because they don't want to say something wrong. And when you're in a writer's room, you have to be willing to say the wrong thing and get rejected. And, that's the skill to have, is to be able to come back. And what you do in those cases, what every writer's room I'd have ever been in, was you have room bits.
Yes.
And I'm sure we had room bits in Toronto back then.
Can you explain a room bit for people who don't know?
A room bit is something funny you do, and it doesn't necessarily have to be after a pitch or anything, but usually writer's rooms will develop things that are basically inside jokes for you, or characters that you do that makes everybody laugh, that has nothing to do with the show. And a lot of times it has to do with saving yourself from a bad pitch.
Right.
And so I would give people this advice. I'd say, first of all, if you think you have a good idea, don't stand up to pitch it.
That's good advice.
Stand up to pitch it. If everybody just stares at you, that's a very long way back down to your seat. That's a long trip back down to your seat. So what I would do is I'd pitch something and everybody would just stare at me. I would just slowly fall out of my chair. And that's how I'd get the laugh.
Yeah.
And so, but my favorite room bit is a room bit that was invented by my friend Mike Rowe, who I had mentioned, who had
mm-hmm.
been with me at MTV and is an Emmy for Futurama. And he called it the up and away. Basically, you pitch something, it doesn't go, and you pretend you're quitting. And the idea is you grab every piece of material that's near you, because the table in the room is usually full of all sorts of tchotchkes, and like you're packing up and you're taking great umbrage and you're leaving.
Right.
And then you have to walk out of the room with all this stuff, like a pile, like you pile all your belongings, and then you have to stay out of the room for a little while. You come back.
You would go that far, huh? You would leave the room. And
I was in one room on the Warner Brothers lot, which was on the ground floor, and it was great because it had a window facing the parking lot, so you could get two laughs. You get the laugh, leaving. And then a few minutes later, you could march by that open window, by the room, going, like you were still.
That's hilarious. That's incredible.
So
I didn't have. I can't think of a particular my bit is failing room joke that I had. But especially when you're a young writer, right? Like you're the young guy in the room, you sort of become the easy target for a lot of stuff. And I was especially early on a very fun target for everyone in the room. So
Yeah.
I very much was a room bit as a human being. Came out that I did martial arts when I was like 10 years old. And so I was the kung fu master in the room. And they one day ordered karate boards to the writing room, and
Yeah.
we're like, we're not breaking story until you break boards. And
Uh-huh.
so now there is a secret video of me doing martial art moves that I did not remember. I probably could have broken a hand or something, but
Yeah.
yeah, you got to do it for the joke, you know?
In the Russian writer's room, I showed him that bit. And so I said, Dmitri, I'm going to say something. You say no. So I said some phony joke pitch. He says no, and I did the whole thing, and they were doubled over laughing. It was probably the best thing I could have taught them,
Yeah.
which was the how you take rejection in a writer's room, how you take risks, because you need to take the risks, because if you don't, it's very quiet and nothing gets done, and you've got to let the bullets bounce off of you. That was probably the most important thing I taught the Russians about being in a writer's room.
I mean, that's such an important lesson, not just for writing, but I think for all creative endeavor. I mean, when the you were talking about sports being the thing that sort of hardened your shell for that.
Yeah,
For me, it was acting. I started out as an actor when I was a kid,
yeah,
and I went to hundreds of auditions, and
yeah.
most of them I did not get. And so,
Right.
especially when you're a kid, it doesn't feel like your life and your income depends on this
Yeah,
thing. It's like much easier to build up deflective armor where it's like, oh, I didn't get that one. I'll do it. I'll do
yeah,
another one and whatever. And that is a skill that I think has been helpful for me, not just in the writing room, but in all creative endeavors as well.
yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you while we're talking about, adapting Raymond to other countries. I know you did it in, I think, Russia, Israel, and India, right?
Right.
The idea of adapting a show is unusual, I think. I mean, at least in my experience, most shows are just like translated or dubbed into, the language and then shipped over there. Or what was the genesis of like the idea of hiring new actors and just completely doing it a new version of Raymond as opposed to just dubbing it?
Yeah, in Russia, where it's in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most adapted show. They did over 400 episodes.
Wow.
And one of the reasons they blew through ours so quickly is because they what they call stripped it. It was every day. The show was on every day, not just once a week. And so that's a lot of material
Yeah.
to get through in a very short amount of time. I assume they adapt them because you want people that speak your language and who you recognize, just whatever the cultural trappings that are around having local scenes, local actors. We weren't the only show that was adapted. I mean, The Nanny was adapted. I think episodes of Roseanne were adapted in various countries. Rules of Engagement. Yeah, I think it was just so that the audience would recognize themselves.
Raymond was so universal because it was about family, really, at its core.
Right.
And um, I think that's why it would work so well in
Yeah.
other countries. But is there or were there specific cultural differences? Say, maybe a Russian or an Indian joke is different than, say, a North American joke in a way that it wouldn't land or it would land. Like, did you have to navigate minefields like that and rely on local writers to sort of help you understand that culturally, or were you and the American team more like, no, this is what's funny. We're teaching you what's funny.
Well, no, I mean, when I went, I had to be open to, what made them laugh. And, in Israel and Moscow, they're pretty Western.
Hmm.
And so there's not that much difference in culturally going on. I mean, like I remember in Israel, I was surprised because my showrunner, my friend Daniel Lappin, there was an episode that I wrote. I wrote with my friend Lou, where Ray and Robert are on a basketball team, recreational basketball team.
Mhm.
And to my surprise, Daniel said, we can't adapt that. I said, why not? He said, because we don't do recreational sports here.
Oh, wow.
I said, really? I mean, you don't have like bowling leagues or anything? No. nothing like
Hmm.
that. And that, which was a very practical kind of thing. In India, there was, we had done an episode, season 2 or 3, I think it's season 2, where Frank is a Civil War reenactor.
Mm.
And so I'm in India and they look at this episode and they say, obviously they can't recreate, they're not interested in recreating our Civil War. And they were looking for a substitute for that. And one of the writers came up with this idea that it'd be about this thing called kabaddi. Now, kabaddi is this sport in India, and maybe in other places too, but it's in India, and you could probably look it up on YouTube. But to me, it was kind of this combination of pro wrestling and Red Rover, where you had these guys, men in thongs, who, shirtless in thongs in teams, and they would sort of link arms and they would chant. They'd go kabaddi, 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 and bang on their legs and their chests. And these two teams would face each other, and then somebody would try to break through each other's lines or something like that. Mm. And one of the writers said, "Why don't we make it, instead of Civil War Arena, we make it kabaddi?" And I said, "That's fantastic. That is better than Civil War reenacting, because instead of guys in Civil War outfits, you can have fat guys in loincloths."
Right.
And in itself is going to be more inherently funny.
That's better for comedy.
Yeah, and since it was about who's going to be on what team anyway, because in the Civil War one, it was that, Frank and Robert are going to be on the Union side, and Ray had to be a Confederate. That was kind of the conflict there.
Right.
This was this comedy thing where Frank character and the Robert character were going to be on one side and Ray was going to be on the other. And it was just, I said, you guys have topped us on this one. This is funnier. This is one case where it's funnier than the original because of this cultural substitution.
That's great. I want to zero in a little bit on the Raymond writing room, because it's so sort of famous for the writers having pulled things from their lives and injecting it, just because that show is so, about kids and family and in-laws and all that kind of stuff. And
yeah.
I'm wondering if there is first of all, how stories were sort of broken in that room, but also if there's a particular thing from your life that you pitched that made it into the show.
Oh, well, every one of my episodes, plus some episodes that I helped on. It was all, I think that's why it's still on today. They're celebrating the 20th anniversary of it going off the air.
Wow.
And we're going to have some sort of television special about that in October, where we're going to do this writers panel. So yeah, it all came from seeds of experience. And I can give you one example. It didn't always happen like this, but a lot of times, in the morning, Phil would say, okay, especially after a weekend, he'd say, okay, what happened today? What happened last night? What happened to you guys? And then we kind of just talk about what happened. And every once in a while, he'd say, put it on the board.
Right.
This one particular year, we were coming back, it was the day after Valentine's Day. Phil said, well, what happened on Valentine's Day? And my friend Tucker Cawley said, well, he described a situation where he and his wife went out, and they had young children, 3 young children, and they went out to dinner, and without the kids there, and they vowed not to talk about the kids.
Yeah.
They just sat there and stared at each other. And Phil said, put it on the board. And that was the episode where Ray and Deborah go out and without the kids, and they're having trouble figuring out what to talk about. Mm-hmm. And that came directly from Tucker and his wife's experience there. That very same night, I didn't go out for Valentine's Day. I was busy burying a dead rat in the backyard, pet rat in the backyard.
Mm-hmm. Romantic.
Yeah. And So I told a story of me, and we live sort of in the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains. So the ground is very hard. And in the backyard, I had to get like a pickaxe to just get a hole deep enough.
Hmm.
And there's sparks flying off the pickaxe and to get it deep enough so that a cat doesn't dig it up again. And this was this pet rat that we had had. And then it starts raining, and I'm upset about having to do all this work to bury the rat, and then it's raining, and the kids want to have like a memorial service for the rat, so we could stand there in the rain.
Hmm.
And we had this tradition for pets where we'd each tell some anecdote about the pet.
Right.
And so I told this story, and Phil said, "Put it on the board." So from that one Valentine's Day, we got two stories, and that was kind of typical. It wouldn't happen in a a rush like that all the time, but that was
Hmm.
typical of what uh, uh, we would do. Is just have these. You learn to kind of farm these little, keep your antenna out and farm these little ideas and conflicts, and then expand upon them and kind of say, "What if? What if this happened?" I mean, you saw it work in the Raising Expectations room. How you kind of take just a little sliver of an idea, of a conflict, of an irritation,
Hmm.
and say, okay, what happens next?
I mean, you mentioned that uh, Raymond wasn't canceled. I mean, obviously, it was such a massive success. It was a choice to go off the air.
Yeah.
I wonder how do you know that it's time? I mean, that's something that like Raymond, Seinfeld, a lot of popular shows end by choice, and I always wondered, like, how do you know it was season 9 and not 8 or 10? Like, at what point was there a discussion in the room about that? Was it showrunner choice? Was it a group decision?
Well, Phil Rosenthal, who is the showrunner, creator of the show, he was a television maven since childhood, and he knew television backwards and forwards. And it was his theory. He said this from the beginning that he didn't think a show ever got better after 7 years.
Hmm.
And so it was always in his mind 7 years. And Raymond was so popular by the time we got to year 7, and we still had ideas. And we had whiteboards with the shows written on them from each season. And I was very proud. I had the best block printing, so I was the one always keeping those records. And so we could always look at the boards, and we had a joke, as the seasons went on, that where if somebody pitched an idea, or we said, have we done that before? And then we kind of look at the board, and if there was something similar, maybe if it was 5 years before, then we could do it again. But if it was 2 years, no, we can't.
Right.
And we didn't actually really repeat ourselves, but we were very conscious of not wanting to repeat ourselves. And there was a core of us who were there from the beginning for 9 years, some for at least 7 years, 6 years. So there was a lot of continuity, which started with Phil, who stayed with the show the entire time, which is unusual. Usually when a show gets successful, the showrunner gets another deal and they go off on another show, and then somebody takes over the show, and it's going to be naturally different because that showrunner is going to have a slightly different sensibility. But Phil never left the show. He got offered. He almost left the show after season 3 and decided he got this big deal from Disney for like $16 million
Wow.
and did the deal. And there was all this discussion about who was going to take over the show. And then Phil finally said, "You know what? I don't want to leave." And he gave back the 16 million and stayed. It worked out okay for him because later on he got a $60 million deal.
Wow.
So,
But that's a lot of conviction though in the show. I mean, he must really have either believed in it or just loved doing it, especially in front of a live audience. I mean, there's so much adrenaline and fun and joy that comes out of that kind of stuff, but there's also a lot of intensity in the workload. I mean, I don't know what it was like on Raymond, but I've heard of shows, 15, 16, 17 hours in the writing room, up against deadlines.
this is why Raymond is a famous writer's room, because we never stayed for dinner, let alone 2 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
That was not true of any other show I was on.
Wow.
And there are certain reasons for this. And to answer your first question, yes, Phil believed in the show, and it was a tremendous amount of fun. And Phil is really a social extrovert and loves the writer's room. And, we just laughed a lot.
Mhm.
So it was hard to leave that. And thank God he didn't, because like I say, the continuity of the show and the quality of the show was maintained because he stayed with it. So, as far as the reason why we didn't have late nights is there are a couple of reasons for this. One is Phil knew the difference between an acting problem and a writing problem. Phil had been an actor himself, and he had done summer stock theater, and which is almost like doing a sitcoms because you're doing a new show every week in theater. And I never saw anybody who could analyze a scene in a run through and fix it on the spot.
Mm.
Just by going, okay, you know what? You need to stand over here and you need to stand over here closer to each other because farther away, the joke doesn't work. Or you're entering too late. You got to stand, he could just boom in a moment kind of analyze a scene, reblock it and fix it. I've never seen anybody that good at that. And so we would have a run through and there would be certain things that didn't work. And we'd go back to the writer's room without Phil because Phil would stay with the actors and give them their notes. And then he'd come back and we'd already started working on the rewrite and marked places that hadn't worked. And we'd say, Phil, what about this? And he'd go, no, I told him how to do it. In other words, he gave the actor the note
Mhm.
to do it a certain way. So we didn't have to write something different because so much that happens. Most writers don't have that experience, either as a director or an actor, and they want to solve everything with writing. So you end up writing a lot of lateral fixes. One thing is just as good as the next because that wasn't really the problem. The problem was the actor didn't have the right intention or the right inflection or the right timing, and he was able to tell the actors how to do it to make what we wrote work. So we weren't spending hours rewriting 45 minutes on a joke that the reason you're working 45 minutes on it is because it really doesn't need it's either there or not.
That's such an interesting skill set because it's like you write a joke in the room or on the page and you think it's funny
Yeah.
and then it flops.
Yeah.
And then to be able to have like it flops, in person, and then to be able to have the foresight to go, oh, but I just need to tweak this little thing. This person needs to stand closer, or this person needs to whisper that line, or whatever the thing is. Like having the foresight to not just throw that away is really an important skill. But also, I think on the flip side, it's like you have to be able to kill your darlings too. And if you have a joke that you think is so great, but it just isn't working, you have to have the discipline too to be like, okay, we're going to throw that out and start again. Was that mindset ever part of it?
Yeah, no, that was part of the thing too. That's the difference between a writing problem and an acting problem.
Yeah.
So he knew it was an acting problem, and sometimes it was a writing problem. And then you go in and rework it, and either rework the scene or rework the joke or whatever. But that's the thing that takes time is working on stuff that's not going to make any difference. And so he was great at that. The other thing that we did, which was an administrative decision that Phil made, it was at the end of season 2 when we realized, okay, it looks like we're going to be coming back for a little while. And so it was his idea because the way the television schedule worked back then was you started pre-production in June, then the actors came in the middle of August. So you had 2.5 months of pre-production. And then you're shooting every week up until March or April. And once you start shooting every week, it eats up all of those shows that you prepared in the pre-production process that summer. So what Phil said was, why don't we pitch stories for the next season before we leave the previous season? And that's what we ended up doing, was pitching stories, getting into the outline form,
Wow.
getting the outlines approved.
Yeah.
And then 10 of us going off and writing them at our leisure during the 2-month hiatus of April, May. Coming back June 1st, we've got 10 rough drafts of scripts.
Wow.
And we table those scripts like we did, tabling, meaning, do the rewrite in the room. And so by the time the actors got there, we were already working on our second wave of scripts. So we had, finished that first wave within the first month. And then the next 6 weeks, we were already working on the second wave of scripts. So by the time the actors came in mid-August and the production started, we were 10 or 12 shows ahead, which is unheard of. And I haven't heard of anybody who's ever been able to do it since. And because one of the reasons is they don't do that many shows. But in spite of that, by the time you get to that end of the season, you're like 2 shows ahead. The added advantage to that was that you did these 10 scripts in June, and then by the time you start working on putting them into production in August, you've had some time away from them. So now you get a fresh look at them when you read, when you hear the table read, and you can make the fixes much easier than you could when it was right hot off the presses. So all of those things combined for us to not have late nights. I mean, there's 2 major factors. Phil knowing the difference between an acting problem and a writing problem, and the fact that we were able to do those shows and get so far ahead before we came back for the next pre-production.
So you would break the stories sort of together. You would talk about ideas, you'd put them on the board, but then individually you would go write your episode and then come back and sort of do a table read of it.
Yeah, that was the thing about the Raymond room, which is also different from most other rooms, is that you had to have an idea or else you weren't going to get to write a script. A lot of times people throw out ideas and they all go on the board, and then the ideas are assigned to who, sometimes you're writing something that wasn't even your idea. Mm-hmm. In the Raymond writer's room, if you had an idea that got approved, you were writing that script. So you did have a sense of proprietary, ownership of that, which I think was good and motivating. And so what would happen is you'd pitch the idea. Phil and Ray was part of the process too. Would kind of break some large beats out of it and say, okay, here's the direction, here's the first act, these beats, second, lead it to here. And then you would go off on your own and write, we always called them 2-pagers, but they're usually about 6 pages, of detailed outline, where you got to kind of fill in those beats and change things around and work on it. And then you'd bring that outline into the room, and we would discuss the outline as a group, and people would have notes, and sometimes you had to do a complete rewrite of the outline. A lot of times it was just tweaks here and there. And then once that was approved, you'd go off and write the script on your own. And then once you wrote the script, you would send your draft of the script to Phil. Nobody else, just Phil, and Phil would read it, and he would give you notes, and then you'd do another draft based on his notes. And then it would come into the room where everybody got a chance to hack away at it. And that process was collaborative, but it was also each individual writer had their time to do what they thought was right for the script. And so you really felt that it was yours, that it was, the fulfillment of an idea that you had, even though sometimes very little of what you wrote was even left in the script after it went to the entire room. Some of the best jokes in my scripts were pitched by somebody else,
Right. But that's the way it is. I mean, you have to sort of accept that that's how it's going to be, and not cling to those things that feel so personal to you, because writing is such a personal thing. You have to be able to let those go for the greater good. Yeah.
And it's tough. It's tough even with that process, which was so what I think healthy. It was tough because, you've thought so deeply about this story. Mm-hmm. Then it goes to the room to people who haven't thought so deeply about it. And they go, do we need this? And you go, no, you need that because this other happened. The thing you haven't read yet comes later. And sometimes, people are just going through it and they're saying this and that. And you're thinking, why did I even write this?
Right.
everything is being questioned. And, wait a minute, we went through the whole outline process. We went through the, first draft process, and now everything, so it didn't mitigate against feeling that many times, because you're still feeling like you're getting your heart ripped out a lot.
Yeah.
But ultimately, in a room with Phil and Ray and the other Raymond writers, it would be better.
Was there much network involvement in terms of notes? Like, did a network ever come in at the 11th hour and crush a story and your back is against the wall? Or
Not, no, no, not really. I mean, in the beginning, yes, as always.
yeah,
And the network actually in that case was not as hands-on as the actual production company, who felt that they needed to justify their jobs. But after a while, they just completely left us alone.
right.
And so we could do whatever we wanted. The very first show that I pitched in that very first Raymond room in '96, it was a show that Christmas at my wife's parents' house. In a Christmas stocking, I had gotten a sleeve of colorful condoms from one of my sisters-in-law that looked like candy money. And so we always kind of made that joke. And when I got hired on Raymond, I was kind of searching around for a first idea. And my wife Shelley said, "Why don't you do something with those colorful condoms? There may be an idea in that." I said, "Oh yeah." And so I brought that idea into the room, and the idea developed in the room that it was Halloween, and it had to do with Ray getting these condoms for, I had to come up with an idea why he was doing that. But the joke of it would be that while Ray and Deborah and the kids are out trick-or-treating, Frank is at the house, holding down the fort, giving out candy. The kids, he gives out too much, he runs out of candy, and he looks for candy. He finds these condoms, thinking it's chocolate.
Right.
And starts handing condoms out to the neighborhood kids, which we thought was hysterically funny. And at that point, the first season of Raymond, we were on Friday nights at 8:30, and CBS said, no, it's too salacious. I mean, it's funny. I think about it now. It's so tame now.
Yeah.
And so I had to come up with another idea for my first episode. The second season, same thing. I said, "Phil, what about the story?" He said, "Yeah." And he had to pitch it to Les Moonves.
Sorry, for those who don't know, Les Moonves was
the president of CBS at the time. The now disgraced president of CBS. He was the big honcho there. And, and he was a big supporter of the show, to give him credit for that. But he said, "No, can't, Monday nights still, because it's 8:30, I can't do it." And then by season 3, we were now a hit, and we were kind of holding down their Monday night lineup. And I said, "Phil, can you pitch this again?" And Phil had his meeting with Les Moonves, and when he came back, we were having lunch, and I said, "Phil, so what did he say about Halloween candy?" And he said, "Yeah, do whatever you want." Right now, we were 9 o'clock Mondays. We're a big hit. I don't care. You guys do whatever you want. And that was pretty much the end of any notes that we ever got. But it took me 3 years to get that episode on the air. It was a particular episode that they didn't do in Russia, and they didn't do in India, because culturally it was too salacious for them.
Do you think Raymond could be made today? Would it get the green light? I'm inclined to think yes, but just because it is so universal. I mean, I watched episodes recently and it completely holds up. I mean, it's still so funny and so relatable. But I wonder if you think comedy has changed, either a generational change or some kind of change to the sensitivity.
A couple things, and mostly having to do with technology. But the first answer to your first question, I say yes, I think it could. And I'm using there's a show out called Leanne with this comedian. I think her name is Leanne Morgan. It's on Netflix, and it's basically based on her life and stand-up career. And she's a middle-aged woman, and I think it's a family. I actually haven't seen it, but from what I know of her and what I've seen of the trailer, it's kind of this family-oriented thing. So, and it's coming from Chuck Lorre, which also helps, because they'll put anything on that he does. And so, yes, I think it could be. Although Phil was never able to get another show on, which is crazy. So I think it could be. But I don't think comedy is different what makes people laugh is always the same thing. What is different now is the technology. First of all, there's kind of a sensibility change, which went from the multicam theatrical comedy with a live audience and laughter to the single cam um, thing like of The Office or Parks and Rec, where the camera is you're getting laughs inside the set. Raymond and those kinds of shows, whether it's Norman Lear or the Chuck Lorre shows, they're all these proscenium theatrical shows. It's basically theater being filmed with a live audience. And that comes from the, I Love Lucy, Honeymooners days of the 50s. That kind of went out of style because there's something bigger and broader about theatrical presentation to this more subtler thing without a laugh track, without and when I say laugh track for Raymond, those were real laughs. Those were people really laughing, and sometimes we had to take laughs out because it got in the way. So it was never fake or manufactured. But there was a sensibility change, and we don't like the laughs, the live audience thing. There's a thing where we get the camera in and say on The Office where two people have an exchange and then they rack focus to somebody behind rolling their eyes at somebody. And that's the joke, which you couldn't do in a Raymond or any multicam comedy because it's really dependent on the words because it's theater. Whereas you can do camera jokes in the single camera format. So that's one thing that I think did kind of culturally change with the generation. It doesn't mean it won't come back. The other thing is streaming is a huge difference now, which introduced more sequential storytelling. Because when you can drop all the episodes at once and people could binge them, you needed cliffhangers to bring them back.
Right.
The Raymond episodes, the All in the Family episodes, the Mary Tyler Moore episodes, whatever show from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s was self-contained. They didn't need you didn't need to know what happened in an episode before to understand what was happening now. But the sequential storytelling, you needed, when they drop them all at once, you needed like something to bring you back to the next episode. And that's a big difference in style. And I use Ted Lasso as an example because what the sequential storytelling is you have this, it requires an arc, which essentially makes the TV series a long movie.
Right.
And it's very hard to sustain a long movie, but it can be done. And if you look at the first season of Ted Lasso, it was done very well. It was about this guy from Midwest America going to the UK. He's ingenuous, and he turns all the cynical people to his side.
Right.
And once that happens, that arc is over. That movie, that 10 or 12 episode movie is done. And now you got to go, okay, what do we do for season 2?
Right.
And you've got to now contrive because now you've changed, all these characters have changed. Whereas in a sitcom of Raymond, everything always goes back to the status quo by the end of the episode.
That's really interesting distinction because it's like there's a couple things at work there, right? It's like there's the episodic element of it, where episodic meaning that it's a self-contained story that begins and ends within the one episode, versus like a serialized story where, as you were describing, it sort of connects and builds across the season, and how that's changed because of the streaming model. Whereas, if you're watching Raymond on a Friday night, you don't necessarily even remember what happened 2 or 3 weeks ago. You're just watching a new story. And so that's, I think, a non-trivial difference between the kinds of comedy and the kinds of stories that are being told now as a result of technology. I think that's really interesting. I want to shift gears a little bit. How do you get your foot in the door in a writing room? Should you you know, try and start out as an assistant? I mean, I have the way I did it, but curious your take.
You know what? I don't have a good answer for that because I'm old and I don't know what's going on right now. I can tell you what I did in my day,
Uh-huh.
and it was, you wrote a spec script for a show that was on the air that was popular that you knew that producers respected,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't ever give that spec script uh, to the show that you were going for, because with the exception of I do that for Seinfeld, but the reason being is that the people on that show know too much about the show and they would just pick apart your spec script, where
Hmm.
somebody who's not part of that show wouldn't have the same investment.
Hmm.
That was the technique that I knew. Uh, Becoming a writer's assistant was another way in, and it all depended on the showrunner and whether I had worked on a show where the showrunners didn't even let the writer assistants in the room. They liked to do all the typing, and so they didn't have anything to do. I don't know the answer to that question because things are different, and the economy of show business in the writing world is different.
Hmm.
And so my advice is to do whatever you can to hone your craft. And one of the things that I alluded to before is I got into this writers group, and that's really what gave me the incentive to actually get something done and get something finished. And it didn't matter that none of us knew what we were talking about. We were all heading to the same goal. And so, what I tell young people, whether they're actors or they want to be, on the production side or writers, I say find people who are doing the thing you're doing at the highest level. And a lot of times that means go to the groundlings, go to Upright Citizens Brigade, go to Second City, take the classes, try to get into the company, audition, because those are the people that are doing it at the highest level that you want to do it. Because those are people who are going to hire you. It's not people like me, because I'm in the twilight. I have no power. It's the people who are directly like a step ahead of you, like Larry David was for me, who I got to know because I had worked with him. I had been in the arena. It was in the stand-up realm, and the bar at the Improv or at Catch a Rising Star, that was my office.
Right.
So you want to go to where those people are. It may be joining a theater company. Find your group, find your peer group is the best piece of advice I can give you. And then those people will lead you to where you need to be.
I think that's really good advice. But I wonder uh, if you could go back and talk to 25-year-old Steve,
Yeah.
what advice would you give him?
Boy. I would say things worked out pretty well for me. So what I was able to do was uh, I was fortunate that I was able to make a living at stand-up back when I was 25, which means I didn't have to be, a waiter, or I could spend my time doing creative things. And so I was lucky. I would say if I could, talk to my 25-year-old self, I would say, don't forget how lucky you are, because I've had nothing but luck. I mean, part of it's talent, most of it's luck. And I would circle all the way back to how we started this
Hmm.
about rejection.
Hmm.
And it would be, it's even somebody who says as successful career as I've had, it's still 99% rejection. And that's part of the gig. That 1% where you get your foot in the door that's going to pay off. So I don't know if I think I would just remind myself how lucky I am.
Well, it also sounds like there's some degree of tenacity, right? Where you
Yeah.
have to be willing to accept those failures and push forward. And But I think that's a really nice full circle way to almost close. I have one last question for you, Steve.
Sure.
I like to
I
end the
can't,
pod.
I can't give you any money, Mike.
Well, that'll be after the podcast. We'll talk about that. But I like to end by asking my guests about a time that they stepped outside of their comfort zone and how that shaped them. Is there such a time that you can maybe think of that was impactful for you?
Well, yeah. I mean, the first time I got up on stage at the Cleveland Comedy Club in March 9th, 1980. That's my anniversary of being in show business. So it's, 45 years.
Wow.
I've been fooling them for 45 years. But that night was definitely not comfortable. It was a rainy night. It was a Sunday, and they didn't call it open mic, they called it amateur night. And it was kind of designed so you bring your own crowd because the winner of the amateur night would be the people who got the most applause from the crowd.
Hmm.
So I brought three friends, a couple friends from college, and I still have the tape somewhere because I had the audio tape recorder set at the table, and uh, it was just a kind of a funky night. And it was like a biker got up and nobody was getting laughs or anything, and I went up and I got maybe 2 or 3 laughs. And it's funny because if I listen to this tape, it's mostly my friends commenting on how scary this room was. And I was terrible, but everybody else was worse. So I won the $50. And then 2 weeks later, I came back and I had new material, and it was a hotter crowd and it was big, and I was really good. And the trailer went over great, but there was some other guy doing old jokes who brought more people, and he won the $50. But it was after that night that Dino Vince buttonholed me after the show and said, "Hey, I'm looking for local MCs, $35 a week," and that started it. But that was the comfort zone that shaped everything.
Wow. Well, that's great. Thank you, Steve. And on that note, I think we'll end it there.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure catching up and talking with you.
Yeah, likewise, Steve. Thanks so much.